Welcome, dear listener. Welcome to this quiet moment in your evening. As you settle into your comfortable space, perhaps adjusting your pillow or pulling your blanket a little closer, I invite you to let go of the busy thoughts of today. Let them drift away like clouds moving slowly across a summer sky. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is nowhere you need to be. This time belongs to you, and together we shall take a gentle journey through history. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time. We're going to visit a place that exists now only in old photographs, faded letters, and the stories passed down through generations. We are going to walk through the streets of New York City as it was in the 1800s. Not the New York of towering glass buildings and rushing subway trains, but a different city altogether. A city of cobblestones and horse-drawn carriages. A city of gas lamps flickering in the evening mist. A city where immigrants from distant lands built new lives, brick by brick, dream by dream. So close your eyes if you wish. Breathe slowly and deeply. Imagine that you are stepping through a doorway, leaving behind the present moment and entering a world that existed nearly 2 centuries ago. The air feels different here. It carries the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread. The sounds are different too. Instead of car engines and electronic hums, you hear the clip-clop of horses, the calls of street vendors, and the distant ringing of church bells. Let yourself be carried by these words, gently, softly, like a small boat floating on a calm river. There is no hurry. We have all the time in the world. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 1800s. Perhaps it is 1850 or 1860 or somewhere in between. The exact year matters less than the feeling of the time. New York City is growing. It is changing. Every day ships arrive at the harbor, carrying people from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and many other places across the ocean. These people have traveled for weeks across rough seas, dreaming of the land they have heard so much about. And now, here they are, stepping onto American soil for the first time, their eyes wide with hope and uncertainty. The city stretches before them like nothing they have ever seen. Manhattan Island, long and narrow, is crowded with buildings that seem to lean against one another for support. The streets are busy, always busy, filled with people walking, working, selling, buying, and simply living their lives. But there is a rhythm to this busyness. It is not the frantic pace of modern times. It is a steadier rhythm, set by the rising and setting of the sun, by the changing of the seasons, by the simple needs of daily life. Let us begin our journey at the south end of Manhattan, near the water. Here the harbor is alive with activity. Tall ships with wooden masts rock gently in the waves. Sailors call out to one another as they unload cargo from distant lands. Barrels of flour, crates of tea, bolts of fabric, and countless other goods make their way from ship to shore. The smell of salt water mingles with the earthier scents of tar and rope and sun-warmed wood. Along the waterfront, warehouses stand in long rows. Their large doors are open, and inside workers move heavy loads with strong arms and patient effort. These are the first sounds of the city's commerce, the foundation upon which everything else is built. But we shall not stay here long. Let us walk further into the city, away from the water, into the neighborhoods where ordinary people make their homes. The streets near the harbor are narrow and winding. They follow paths that were laid out long ago when New York was still a small Dutch settlement called New Amsterdam. The buildings here are old, some of them built 100 years before our visit. They are made of red brick or brown stone, with small windows and steep roofs.
Some have shops on the ground floor with living quarters above. Others are simply homes where families have lived for generations. As we walk, we notice the cobblestones beneath our feet. They are uneven, worn smooth in some places, and rough in others. After a rain, puddles collect between them, reflecting the gray sky above. In dry weather, dust rises with each footstep, settling on shoes and hems of skirts. This is not a city of smooth sidewalks and paved roads. This is a city where the ground itself tells stories of countless feet that have walked this way before. The buildings grow taller as we move northward, up Broadway and along the other great avenues. Here, the architecture becomes more elegant. Wealthy merchants and successful businessmen have built fine houses with tall windows and decorative ironwork. The doors are painted in deep greens and rich blues. The steps leading up to them are clean and well kept. Flower boxes sit on windowsills, adding spots of color to the gray and brown cityscape. But we shall not linger among the wealthy. Our story tonight is about ordinary people, about the daily rhythms of common life. So let us turn down a side street into one of the neighborhoods where working families live. Here the buildings are crowded. Several families might share a single building, each occupying 1 or 2 rooms. The hallways are dim, lit only by whatever light comes through small windows at each landing. The walls are thin, and sounds pass from one home to another. A baby crying, a mother singing, a father coming home from a long day of work. These are the tenement buildings that will become so much a part of New York's story. In this time, they are still relatively new. Landlords build them quickly, trying to house the growing population of immigrants and workers that flood into the city each year. The rooms are small, often without much ventilation or natural light. But for families who have traveled across oceans to reach this place, these small rooms represent something precious. They represent a beginning, a foothold in a new world. Outside, the streets are narrow and crowded with life. Children play among the buildings, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. Women hang laundry from lines strung between windows, the white and colored fabrics creating a kind of patchwork sky above the alley. Men gather on corners, talking about work, about politics, about news from the old country. The air is filled with languages from around the world. English, yes, but also German, Irish Gaelic, Italian, Yiddish, and many others. This is a city of many voices, many stories, all woven together. Let us now follow the rhythm of a single day in this city. We begin in the early morning, before the sun has fully risen. The sky is pale, a soft gray, touched with hints of pink and gold along the eastern horizon. The city is quieter now than it will be in a few hours. Most people are still asleep, wrapped in blankets, dreaming their private dreams. But not everyone sleeps. In the bakeries, the bakers have been awake for hours. They began their work in the deep darkness of night, mixing flour and water and yeast, kneading the dough with practiced hands. Now, as dawn approaches, the first loaves are coming out of the brick ovens. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the streets, warm and comforting. It slips through cracks in windows and under doors, gently announcing that a new day has begun. The milkmen are also awake. They guide their horses through the empty streets, the wagons loaded with metal cans full of fresh milk from farms beyond the city. The horses know the route by heart. They stop at each house where milk is needed, waiting patiently while the milkman carries the heavy cans to the doorstep. The sound of their hooves on the cobblestones is soft and steady, a gentle rhythm that accompanies the waking city. In the tenements, mothers begin to stir. They rise from beds they share with husbands and children, moving quietly so as not to wake the little ones just yet. There is water to fetch from the pump in the courtyard or the street. There is a fire to start in the small iron stove. There is breakfast to prepare, simple food that will give the family strength for the day ahead. Perhaps it is porridge, cooked slowly until it thickens. Perhaps it is bread with a little butter or jam. Perhaps it is nothing more than tea and whatever was left from last night's supper. The fathers wake next, or perhaps they are already awake, lying still for a few precious moments before the day's labor begins. Many of them work long hours, 10 or 12 or even 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. They work in factories, in warehouses, on construction sites, in shops. They work because there is no other choice. The family depends on their wages, however small. Every dollar, every cent is needed for rent, for food, for clothing, for the countless expenses of daily life.
As the sun rises higher, the children begin to wake. Some of them will go to school, at least for a few hours. Education is becoming more common in the city, and many neighborhoods have small schoolhouses where children learn to read, write, and do arithmetic. But many other children will work alongside their parents, contributing their own small earnings to the family income. Boys might sell newspapers on street corners or shine shoes for businessmen. Girls might help their mothers with piecework, sewing buttons onto shirts or assembling artificial flowers to sell. The streets begin to fill with people. Workers walk to their jobs, their footsteps quick and purposeful. Vendors push carts loaded with goods, calling out their wares in sing-song voices. Fresh fish, apples, red apples, hot corn, get your hot corn here. The calls overlap and blend, creating a kind of music that is unique to the city streets. Horses and wagons crowd the larger avenues. Delivery wagons carry goods from the waterfront to shops throughout the city. Private carriages carry wealthy families to appointments and social calls. Omnibuses, those early forms of public transportation, move slowly through the traffic, picking up passengers who pay a few cents for the ride. The drivers call out to their horses, urging them forward, guiding them around obstacles, keeping the flow of traffic moving. The morning light grows stronger, casting long shadows across the streets. The buildings seem to glow in the golden light, their windows catching the sun and reflecting it back like countless small mirrors. Smoke rises from chimneys, thin gray columns that drift upward and disappear into the sky. The city is fully awake now, humming with life and energy. But there is a calmness beneath the activity. The rhythm of the day is steady and predictable. People know what they need to do, and they do it. There is comfort in routine, in the familiar patterns of work and rest. The city may be crowded and busy, but it is also a place where people find their own small corners of peace. A moment of quiet conversation with a neighbor, a shared meal with family, a few minutes of rest in the afternoon sun. This is the city we are visiting tonight. A city of hard work and simple pleasures. A city of immigrants and natives, of rich and poor, of many languages and cultures all living side by side. It is a city that is changing, growing, becoming something new. But in this moment, in this single day we are imagining together, it is simply a place where people live their lives, one day at a time. And so, as we continue our journey through the hours of this day, let yourself relax even more deeply. Let the images drift through your mind like scenes from a pleasant dream. There's nothing to worry about, nothing to fear, only the gentle unfolding of history, carrying us softly through time. As we continue our peaceful journey through the 19th century New York, let us step inside the homes where ordinary people lived their daily lives.
Let us see how families made their small spaces feel like home, how they filled their rooms with warmth and love despite the challenges they faced. The homes of working-class families in this era were modest by any standard. Many families lived in just 1 or 2 rooms where all the activities of daily life took place. Cooking, eating, sleeping, working, and playing all happened within these cramped quarters. A single room might contain a bed shared by parents and younger children, a small table with a few wooden chairs, a cast-iron stove for cooking and heating, and perhaps a trunk or cabinet where the family kept their few possessions. The walls of these rooms were often bare, though some families hung simple pictures or religious images to make the space feel more personal. A crucifix might hang above the bed in an Irish Catholic home. A portrait of the old country might grace the wall of a German family's room. These small decorations were reminders of where people came from, of the traditions and beliefs they carried with them across the ocean. The floors were usually bare wood, worn smooth by countless footsteps. In winter, families might lay down old rags or straw mats to keep out the cold that seeped up from below. The windows were small, often letting in little light, especially in buildings where other structures stood close on either side. On dark days, families relied on candles or oil lamps to see by, the soft yellow light casting flickering shadows on the walls. But despite the simplicity of these homes, families filled them with life. Mothers sang songs while they worked, old melodies from their homelands that spoke of love, of loss, of hope. Fathers told stories in the evening, tales of heroes and adventures that made children's eyes grow wide with wonder. Brothers and sisters played together, inventing games with whatever materials they could find. A piece of string, a few pebbles, a worn-out ball made of rags wrapped tightly together. The kitchen, if it could be called that, was centered around the iron stove. This simple device was the heart of the home. It provided heat on cold winter nights, keeping the family warm when snow fell thick outside. It provided the means to cook meals, to boil water for tea, to bake bread when flour could be afforded. The fire inside had to be carefully tended, fed with coal or wood purchased from vendors who roamed the streets with their loaded carts. Water was not something that flowed easily from taps in these homes. Most tenement buildings did not have running water inside the apartments. Instead, families fetched water from pumps in the courtyard or on the street corner. Mothers and children made multiple trips each day, carrying heavy buckets back to their rooms. This water was used for drinking, cooking, washing dishes, washing clothes, and bathing. Every drop was precious and had to be used carefully. Bathing was not a daily occurrence as it might be today. Most families bathed once a week, often on Sunday evening in preparation for Sunday, which was a day of rest and, for many, a day of religious observance. A large basin or tub would be filled with water heated on the stove, and family members would take turns washing. Privacy was limited in these small spaces, but modesty was maintained as best as possible, with hung blankets or simple curtains. The beds in these homes were simple affairs: a wooden frame, a mattress stuffed with straw or horsehair, and a few blankets and quilts made by hand. Pillows were stuffed with feathers if the family could afford them, or with rags and scraps if they could not. Children often slept together, 2 or 3 to a bed, their small bodies keeping each other warm through the cold nights. The youngest children might sleep with their parents, tucked safely between mother and father. Despite the crowded conditions, there was a coziness to these homes that is hard to imagine today. Families were close, physically and emotionally. They depended on each other for everything. They shared meals, shared stories, shared laughter and tears. The bonds between family members were strong, forged in the daily struggles and small victories of life in a new world. Let us now consider what people wore in this time. Clothing in 19th century New York was practical above all else. For working-class families, clothes had to be durable, easy to clean, and affordable. Fashion was a luxury that most could not consider. Men wore simple trousers made of sturdy wool or cotton, held up by suspenders rather than belts. Their shirts were plain, often white or off-white, with long sleeves that could be rolled up for work. Over their shirts, they might wear vests, which added an extra layer of warmth and gave a more finished appearance. Jackets were worn when going out, especially in cooler weather, though a working man might remove his jacket while laboring to keep it clean. On their heads, men wore hats of various styles. The flat cap was popular among working men, its simple design keeping the sun or rain out of the eyes. Bowler hats and top hats were seen on wealthier men, signaling their higher social status. A man's hat was an important part of his identity, and it was considered improper to go out in public without one. Shoes were often the most expensive item of clothing a man owned. Good leather boots could last for years if properly cared for. Many men had only one pair, which they wore every day, carefully cleaning and oiling the leather to keep it supple. Cobblers were common in every neighborhood, skilled craftsmen who could repair worn soles and replace broken laces, extending the life of precious footwear. Women's clothing was more complex, though no less practical. Dresses were the universal garment for women of all classes. Working women wore simple dresses made of cotton or wool, in dark colors that did not show dirt easily. The dresses had long skirts that reached the ground and long sleeves that covered the arms. Modesty was highly valued, and showing too much skin was considered improper. Beneath their dresses, women wore multiple layers. A chemise, a simple undergarment, was worn against the skin. Over this came a corset, which was laced tightly to shape the waist. While wealthy women wore elaborate corsets that created extreme hourglass figures, working women wore simpler versions that provided support without restricting movement too much. Petticoats added fullness to the skirts, and in colder weather, additional layers provided warmth. Women covered their hair when going out, usually with bonnets or simple caps. Hair was typically worn long, pinned up in styles that kept it out of the way during work. Unmarried girls might wear their hair down or in simple braids, while married women were expected to wear their hair up, a sign of their adult status. Children's clothing was simpler still. Young boys wore short pants and simple shorts, graduating to long trousers as they grew older. Young girls wore smaller versions of their mother's dresses, learning from an early age the expectations of feminine modesty. Clothing was often handed down from older children to younger ones, mended and altered to fit new wearers. Nothing was wasted in these families, where every resource was precious. Food in 19th century New York was simple, hearty, and designed to provide energy for long days of physical work. Families ate what they could afford, which often meant a limited variety of ingredients prepared in straightforward ways. Bread was the foundation of most meals. Every neighborhood had its bakeries, where loaves were baked fresh each morning. The smell of baking bread drifted through the streets, calling customers to come and buy. A loaf of bread could feed a family for a day or more, served with butter if available, or simply eaten plain. Stale bread was never thrown away. It was soaked in milk to make a simple pudding, crumbled into soups to add substance, or toasted over the fire to restore some of its freshness. Potatoes were another staple, especially for Irish immigrant families who had relied on them in their homeland. Potatoes were cheap, filling, and versatile. They could be boiled, mashed, fried, or added to stews. A pot of potatoes with a little salt and butter was a meal in itself for many families. When other food was scarce, potatoes kept hunger at bay. Meat was more expensive and was eaten less frequently by working families. When they could afford it, they bought cheaper cuts like offal, feet, or tails, which could be cooked slowly in stews until tender. Pig's feet, tripe, and liver were common foods among the poor. Sausages made from various
Scraps of meat were popular and affordable. On special occasions, a family might splurge on a roast or a whole chicken, a rare treat that made an ordinary Sunday feel like a celebration. Fish was plentiful in a city surrounded by water. Fresh fish could be purchased cheaply near the waterfront, where fishing boats brought in their daily catches. Oysters were particularly abundant and incredibly cheap in this era. Street vendors sold them raw from carts, shucking them on the spot for customers who slurped them down standing in the street. Oysters were food for the common people, not the luxury they would later become. Vegetables came from markets scattered throughout the city. Cabbage, carrots, onions, and turnips were common and affordable. In summer, fresh produce was more varied, with tomatoes, beans, and corn available from farms outside the city. Many families made simple soups and stews, combining whatever vegetables they could afford with a bit of meat or bones for flavor. These one-pot meals were economical and efficient, requiring only a single cooking vessel and feeding the whole family from one dish. Milk was delivered daily to those who could afford it. It was especially important for children and was often the first thing purchased when a family had a little extra money. Cheese was also common, providing protein and flavor. Eggs were affordable when hens were laying well, and they were prepared in countless ways: fried, boiled, scrambled, or added to other dishes for extra nourishment. Sweets were rare treats, sugar was expensive, and elaborate desserts were beyond the reach of most families. Children might receive a piece of hard candy or a cookie as a special reward. On holidays and birthdays, mothers might bake simple cakes or pies, using whatever fruits or sweeteners were available. These treats were treasured all the more for their rarity. Meals were eaten together as a family whenever possible. Breakfast was quick and simple, preparing everyone for the day ahead. Lunch, if it was eaten at all, was a brief pause in the workday. The evening meal was the main gathering time, when the family came together after the day's labors. Father would say grace if the family was religious, thanking God for the food before them. Then everyone would eat, sharing stories of their day, discussing plans for tomorrow, simply enjoying each other's company. The streets of 19th century New York were a world unto themselves. They were the arteries through which the lifeblood of the city flowed, carrying people and goods from one place to another in a constant, never-ending stream. The main avenues were broad and busy, lined with shops and businesses that catered to every need. Broadway was the grandest of these, stretching the length of Manhattan Island, from the harbor in the south to the open countryside in the north. Along Broadway, one could find everything from simple grocers to elegant hotels, from humble workshops to grand theaters. The sidewalks were crowded with pedestrians, moving in both directions, weaving around each other with practiced ease. The side streets were narrower and quieter, residential areas where families lived in rows of identical buildings. Here the pace was slower, and neighbors knew each other by name. Children played in the streets, their games interrupted occasionally by passing wagons or carts. Women chatted on stoops and doorsteps, keeping an eye on the children while exchanging news and gossip. Transportation in this era was primarily by foot or by horse. Most people walked wherever they needed to go, regardless of distance. Walking was free, and it was often the fastest way to navigate the crowded streets. Workers walked to their jobs, housewives walked to the markets, children walked to school. Strong shoes and strong legs were essential for city living. For those who could afford it, there were other options. Horse-drawn omnibuses traveled along set routes, picking up passengers who paid a small fare. These were essentially wooden boxes on wheels, pulled by teams of horses.
They were crowded and uncomfortable, but faster than walking for longer distances. The horses plodded along familiar routes, their drivers calling out stops and urging passengers to make room for newcomers. Wealthier citizens traveled in private carriages, elegant vehicles with cushioned seats and glass windows. Coachmen sat on high seats at the front, guiding the horses through traffic. Inside, passengers rode in relative comfort, protected from the dust and noise of the streets. These carriages were symbols of wealth and status, and ordinary people stepped aside to let them pass. The streets themselves were made of various materials depending on the neighborhood. Main avenues might be paved with cobblestones, rounded rocks set closely together in a bed of sand. These provided a relatively smooth surface for wheels and hooves, though they became slippery when wet. Side streets were often unpaved, simple dirt roads that turned to mud after rain and dust during dry spells. Keeping the streets clean was a constant challenge. Horses produced enormous amounts of manure, which accumulated on the roads and had to be swept away by street cleaners. Garbage was often tossed into the streets, where pigs and dogs roamed freely, scavenging for food. The smell could be overwhelming, especially in summer, when the heat intensified every odor. But people adapted, as people always do. They held handkerchiefs to their noses, walked quickly past the worst spots, and went about their business. Despite the dirt and the noise, there was a vitality to these streets that was undeniable. They were places of commerce and community, where people from all walks of life crossed paths. A wealthy banker might pass a poor street sweeper. A newly arrived immigrant might brush shoulders with a family that had lived in New York for generations. The streets were democratic spaces, belonging to everyone and no one, constantly changing, yet somehow always the same. And as we walk these streets in our imagination, let us feel the cobblestones beneath our feet, hear the clip-clop of horses, smell the bread from the bakery and the flowers from the vendor's cart. Let us be part of this world for a moment, this world that existed so long ago, yet feels so alive in our minds. Breathe slowly, dear listener. Let yourself drift deeper into relaxation. The story continues, and there is much more to discover, but there is no hurry at all, just the gentle unfolding of history, carrying us softly through time. As we continue our gentle journey through 19th century New York, let us now explore the rich social life and culture that flourished in this bustling city. Despite the hard work and long hours that filled most days, people found time for connection, celebration, and the simple pleasures of community life. The neighborhoods of New York were like small villages within the larger city. Each one had its own character, shaped by the people who lived there. In the Lower East Side, Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe created a vibrant community where Yiddish was spoken on every corner. Synagogues and small prayer houses dotted the streets, and the smell of fresh challah bread drifted from bakeries on Friday afternoons as families prepared for the Sabbath. A few blocks away, Italian immigrants had established their own neighborhood, known as Little Italy. Here the air was filled with the aromas of garlic and tomatoes and the sounds of Italian dialects from Naples, Sicily, and other regions blended together. Old men sat on wooden chairs outside their buildings, playing cards and discussing the news. Mothers leaned from windows, calling their children home for supper in voices that echoed off the narrow streets. The Irish had come earlier, fleeing the devastating famine in their homeland during the 1840s and 1850s. They settled in neighborhoods like Five Points and Hell's Kitchen, where they built churches, established political organizations, and slowly climbed the ladder of American society. The sound of fiddles and tin whistles could be heard from pubs where men gathered after work, sharing a pint and singing songs from the old country. German immigrants brought their own traditions to neighborhoods like Kleindeutschland or Little Germany. Beer gardens flourished here, outdoor spaces where families could gather on warm evenings to enjoy music, conversation, and the excellent lagers brewed by German craftsmen. The Germans also brought their love of music, establishing choral societies and orchestras that performed in halls throughout the city. These ethnic neighborhoods were not isolated from each other. The boundaries between them were fluid, and people crossed them daily for work, shopping, and socializing. A Jewish tailor might make suits for Irish businessmen. An Italian grocer might sell vegetables to German housewives. The city was a tapestry of cultures, each thread distinct, yet woven together into something larger and more beautiful than any single strand. The markets of 19th-century New York were gathering places where the social and commercial life of the city came together. They were noisy, colorful, and full of life, places where you could find almost anything you needed and encounter almost anyone you might know. The largest markets were held in open squares or purpose-built market halls. Fulton Market, near the waterfront, was famous for its fresh fish and seafood. Here, fishermen brought their catches directly from the boats, and customers could buy fish that had been swimming in the ocean just hours before. The smell of the sea filled the air, mingled with the shouts of vendors advertising their wares. Fresh flounder, lobsters, live lobsters, oysters by the dozen, cheap and fresh. Washington Market, located on the west side of Lower Manhattan, was one of the largest produce markets in the country. Farmers from Long Island, New Jersey, and the Hudson Valley brought their fruits and vegetables here to sell. Mountains of cabbages, baskets of apples, bundles of carrots, and sacks of potatoes filled the stall. Housewives came early in the morning to get the best selection, carrying large baskets that they filled with provisions for the week ahead. Smaller markets existed in every neighborhood, more modest affairs where local vendors sold a variety of goods. These markets were social centers as much as commercial ones. Neighbors met and exchanged news. Women discussed recipes and shared advice about cooking and housekeeping. Children ran between the stalls, sometimes helping their parents, sometimes simply playing and getting underfoot. Beyond the markets, shops of every kind lined the streets. Butcher shops displayed cuts of meat in their windows, the butcher himself standing ready with his sharp knives and bloody apron. Bakeries offered fresh bread, rolls, and pastries, their display cases filled with tempting treats. Grocery stores sold dry goods like flour, sugar, rice, and beans, measured out from large barrels and bins into paper packages for customers. Clothing stores catered to every budget. In the wealthier neighborhoods, elegant shops displayed the latest fashions from Paris and London. Tailors took careful measurements and created custom garments for discerning customers. In working-class neighborhoods, ready-made clothing was available at lower prices, and second-hand shops sold used garments that still had plenty of wear left in them. Hardware stores sold tools and household implements. Apothecaries offered medicines, remedies, and tonics for every ailment. Dry goods stores displayed bolts of fabric in every color, along with buttons, ribbons, thread, and other sewing supplies. Whatever you needed, there was a shop somewhere in the city that sold it. Shopping was a social activity, not merely a commercial transaction. Shopovers knew their regular customers by name and often extended credit to trusted families who might not have cash available until payday. Conversations flowed easily across counters, discussions of weather and family, of politics and neighborhood gossip. A trip to the store was an opportunity to connect with the community, to feel part of something larger than oneself. Family was the center of life in 19th century New York. In a world without social safety nets or government assistance, family members depended on each other for everything. The bonds between parents and children, between siblings, between extended family members were strong and enduring. Families tended to be larger than they are today. It was common for couples to have 6, 8, or even 10 children, though sadly, not all of them would survive to adulthood. Childhood diseases that are easily prevented today claimed many young lives. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough, and measles were constant threats. Families mourned their losses deeply, but found ways to carry on, holding tight to the children who remained. The roles within families were clearly defined. Fathers were the primary breadwinners, responsible for earning the money that kept the family fed and housed. They worked long hours at demanding jobs, coming home tired but still expected to maintain their position as head of the household. Fathers made major decisions about finances, about where the family would live, about the futures of their children. Mothers managed the home, a job that was no less demanding than their husbands' work outside. They cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, cared for sick children, and maintained the household on often limited budgets. A good mother could stretch a small amount of money to cover all the family's needs, finding ways to economize without sacrificing quality of life. Mothers were also the emotional centers of their families, providing comfort, encouragement, and love. Children were expected to contribute to the family as soon as they were able. Young children helped with small tasks around the home, fetching water, running errands, minding younger siblings. As they grew older, they took on more responsibility. Boys might work alongside their fathers or find jobs of their own, delivering newspapers, running messages, or working in shops and factories. Girls helped their mothers with housework and often earned money through piecework they could do at home. Education was valued, but not always possible. Public schools were becoming more common during this era, and many children attended for at least a few years. They learned reading, writing, arithmetic, and other basic subjects that would help them succeed in life. But for poor families, the need for children's wages often outweighed the benefits of education. Many children left school early to work, their formal learning cut short by economic necessity. Despite the hardships, families found joy in their time together. Sundays were precious days of rest when work stopped and families could focus on each other. Many families attended religious services in the morning, gathering in churches, synagogues, or other houses of worship to pray and hear sermons. The afternoon might be spent visiting relatives, taking walks in the park, or simply resting at home. Holidays brought special celebrations. Christmas was observed by Christian families with church services, special meals, and modest gifts for children. Irish families marked St. Patrick's Day with parades and gatherings. German families celebrated Christmas with decorated trees, a tradition that would eventually spread throughout American culture. Weddings were joyful occasions that brought families and communities together. Young couples married in churches or synagogues, surrounded by relatives and friends. The ceremonies were followed by celebrations that might last for hours, with food, music, and dancing. These were rare opportunities to forget the struggles of daily life and simply celebrate love and hope for the future. Funerals were equally important, solemn occasions that marked the passing of loved ones. Bodies were typically kept at home for a period of mourning, and neighbors came to pay their respects. Religious services offered comfort and the promise of life beyond death. Burial took place in cemeteries outside the crowded city, and families visited these resting places regularly, tending graves and remembering those who had gone before. The neighborhoods of 19th century New York were tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else. This closeness was born of necessity as much as choice. In a world without telephones or electronic communication, people relied on face-to-face interaction for everything. Information traveled by word of mouth, from neighbor to neighbor, house to house. Neighbors helped each other in times of need. When a family faced illness or hardship, others in the community stepped in to help. Women brought food to families where the mother was too sick to cook. Men helped with repairs and heavy work when a father was injured. Children were watched by neighbors when parents had to work or deal with emergencies. This mutual aid was the social safety net of the era, informal but essential. Churches and religious organizations played central roles in community life. They provided not only spiritual guidance, but also practical assistance to those in need. Many churches operated schools, orphanages, and aid societies that helped the poor and vulnerable. Religious leaders were respected figures in their communities, and their counsel was sought on matters both spiritual and practical. Political organizations also helped bind communities together. Political clubs organized voters, advocated for neighborhood interests, and provided connections to the larger world of city government. Political bosses, whatever their faults, often served as advocates for their communities, helping immigrants navigate the bureaucracy of their new country and find jobs and housing. Social clubs and fraternal organizations offered fellowship and mutual support. Groups like the Odd Fellows, the Masons, and various ethnic benefit societies provided insurance against illness and death, ensuring that families would not be left destitute when tragedy struck. They also organized social events, dances, picnics, and parades that brought communities together in celebration. The streets themselves were social spaces where community life unfolded. In good weather, people spent as much time as possible outside their cramped apartments. Stoops and doorsteps became gathering places where neighbors sat and talked. Children played in the streets under the watchful eyes of adults who knew them all by name. Vendors and peddlers provided not only goods, but also news and gossip from other neighborhoods. This sense of community provided emotional support that helped people cope with the challenges of city life. Knowing that you were not alone, that others understood your struggles and would help if they could, made difficult times more bearable. The community celebrated victories together and mourned losses together. Individual lives were woven into a larger fabric of shared experience. Despite the long hours of work that filled most days, people found time for recreation and entertainment. These moments of leisure were precious, and they were savored all the more because they were rare. Music was everywhere in 19th century New York. In poor neighborhoods, people made their own music with whatever instruments they had. Fiddles, accordions, tin whistles, and harmonicas were common. People sang songs from their homelands, keeping alive the musical traditions of Ireland, Germany, and Italy, and other places. They also learned new songs, American songs, that became part of their new identity. For those who could afford it, commercial entertainment was available throughout the city. Theaters presented plays, musicals, and variety shows that attracted audiences from all social classes. The Bowery was famous for its theaters, which catered to working-class audiences, with melodramas full of heroes, villains, and dramatic rescues. Wealthier audiences attended more refined performances on Broadway, where Shakespeare and other classical works were presented. Minstrel shows were popular entertainment during this era, though we must acknowledge that they were deeply problematic by modern standards. They perpetuated harmful stereotypes and contributed to racial prejudice. Yet they were part of the entertainment landscape of the time, and understanding history requires acknowledging even its troubling aspects. Beer gardens and saloons were important social spaces, especially for men. Here, workers gathered after their shifts to relax with friends, share drinks, and discuss the events of the day. Many of these establishments offered free lunches with the purchase of drinks, providing sustenance as well as refreshment. The atmosphere was convivial,
and lasting friendships were forged over shared mugs of beer. Parks provided green spaces where city dwellers could escape the crowded streets. Central Park was under construction during the middle of the century and would eventually become the great green heart of Manhattan. But smaller parks and squares existed throughout the city, offering benches, shade trees, and places to sit and rest. On Sundays and holidays, families packed picnic lunches and spent hours in these parks, enjoying the fresh air and open space. Sports and games provided entertainment for participants and spectators alike. Baseball was becoming increasingly popular, with amateur teams forming in neighborhoods throughout the city. Boxing matches drew crowds of enthusiastic fans. Horse racing attracted gamblers and spectators to tracks outside the city. Simpler games like marbles, hopscotch, and tag kept children entertained for hours.
Reading was a pleasure for those who were literate. Newspapers were widely available and widely read, providing news, opinions, and entertainment. Serialized novels appeared in newspapers and magazines, their stories unfolding week by week. Libraries were beginning to emerge, providing free access to books for those who could not afford to buy their own. The printed word was a window to other worlds, other times, other ways of thinking. And so, dear listener, as we explore the social life of this remarkable city, let us appreciate the ways people found connection and joy amid their daily struggles. They were not so different from us in their need for community, for celebration, for moments of beauty and pleasure. Their world was different, but their hearts were the same. Rest now, breathe slowly, and let these images drift peacefully through your mind. There is still more of our story to tell, but there is no hurry. The night is long, and history unfolds at its own gentle pace. As we continue our peaceful journey through the 19th century New York, let us now explore how people earned their living in this bustling city. Work was the foundation of survival, and nearly everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, contributed in some way to the family's income. The city offered countless ways to make a living, though none of them were easy. Factories had begun to spring up throughout Manhattan, producing everything from clothing to furniture to machinery. Inside these factories, workers labored for 10, 12, or even 14 hours a day, performing repetitive tasks in dimly lit rooms. The work was monotonous and exhausting, but it provided steady wages that families depended upon. The garment industry was particularly important in New York. Thousands of workers, many of them women and immigrants, sewed clothing in factories and workshops throughout the city. They cut fabric, stitched seams, attached buttons, and finished garments that would be sold in shops throughout America. The work required skill and speed, and workers were often paid by the piece, meaning the faster they worked, the more they earned. Many women did piecework at home, combining their domestic responsibilities with income-earning labor. They might sew buttons onto shirts, roll cigars, make artificial flowers, or assemble small items that could be produced at a kitchen table. Children often helped with this work, their small fingers well suited to delicate tasks. The pay was meager, but every cent added to the family's income. Men found work in countless trades and occupations. Skilled craftsmen like carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, and printers earned decent wages and enjoyed a measure of respect in their communities. These trades required years of apprenticeship to master, and skilled workers took pride in their abilities. They were the middle class of the working world, not wealthy, but comfortable enough to provide for their families. Unskilled laborers had fewer options and lower wages.
They worked on the docks, loading and unloading ships that arrived from around the world. They dug ditches, laid paving stones, and built the infrastructure of the growing city. They carried heavy loads, swept streets, and performed the countless unglamorous tasks that kept the city functioning. This work was physically demanding and often dangerous, but it was available to anyone willing to do it. The waterfront was a world unto itself, a place where thousands of men earned their living from the sea. Longshoremen worked in gangs, unloading cargo from ships and loading it onto wagons for transport throughout the city. The work was irregular, available only when ships were in port, and men gathered each morning hoping to be chosen for a day's labor. Those who were selected worked hard, knowing that tomorrow's work was never guaranteed. Street vendors were a common sight throughout the city. They sold everything imaginable from carts and baskets carried through the streets. Some sold food, hot corn, roasted chestnuts, fresh fruit, baked potatoes, and countless other items that hungry city dwellers could eat on the go. Others sold household goods, matches, ribbons, combs, and small necessities that housewives needed but might not have time to seek out in shops. Children worked alongside adults, contributing to family income from an early age. Newsboys were familiar sights on street corners, shouting headlines and selling newspapers to passers-by. Bootblacks set up small stands where they polished shoes for businessmen hurrying to appointments. Messenger boys ran errands for businesses, carrying documents and packages throughout the city. These jobs paid little, but for poor families, every penny mattered. Domestic service employed many women and girls. Wealthy families hired servants to cook, clean, care for children, and manage their households. Servants lived in their employers' homes, working long hours for modest wages plus room and board. The work was demanding, and servants had little time to themselves, but for immigrant women without other options, domestic service provided security and a roof over their heads. Survival in 19th-century New York required resourcefulness and determination. Wages were low, and expenses were constant. Rent had to be paid, food had to be bought, clothing had to be made or bought. Families economized in every way they could, stretching their limited resources as far as possible. Nothing was wasted. Worn clothing was mended and passed down. Leftover food was transformed into new meals. Every resource was used to its fullest extent. When times were especially hard, families relied on each other and on their communities. Neighbors shared what they had. Churches and charitable organizations provided assistance to the truly desperate. Some families took in boarders, renting out a corner of their already crowded rooms to earn a little extra income. Others sent children to live with relatives who were better off, painful separations that were sometimes necessary for survival. Despite the hardships, most families found ways to get by. They adapted to their circumstances, finding small economies and small opportunities wherever they could. They took pride in their work, whatever it was, and in their ability to provide for their loved ones. Work was hard, but it was also meaningful. It was the foundation of dignity and self-respect. As the sun begins to set over 19th-century New York, the character of the city slowly transforms. The frantic energy of the workday gradually gives way to something softer, quieter, more peaceful. Let us follow this transition from day to night, from work to rest, from activity to stillness. The afternoon shadows lengthen across the cobblestone streets. The angle of the light changes, becoming warmer and more golden. Workers begin to finish their shifts, putting away tools, closing account books, sweeping up workshops for the night. The factories empty out, streams of tired workers flowing through the gates and dispersing into the city. The streets remain busy for a while longer, but the nature of the activity changes. Instead of commerce and labor, the focus shifts to homecoming and reunion. Men walk briskly toward their neighborhoods, eager to see their families after long hours away. Women finish their shopping, selecting the last items needed for the evening meal. Children are called in from their play, their games interrupted by mothers' voices echoing through the streets.
In the tenement buildings, families gather for their evening meal. The smell of cooking fills the narrow hallways, different aromas mingling together. Cabbage soup from one apartment, fried fish from another, fresh bread from yet another. Fathers wash their hands and faces, scrubbing away the grime of the day's labor. Children set the table with whatever dishes the family owns. Mothers serve the food, making sure everyone has enough. The evening meal is a time of togetherness. The family sits around the small table, crowded perhaps, but close. Father says grace if the family is religious, giving thanks for the food and for another day safely completed. Then the meal begins, simple food eaten with appreciation. Conversation flows, stories of the day are shared, small victories and minor frustrations are discussed. For a little while, the cares of the world can be set aside. As darkness falls, the city takes on a different appearance. The gas lamps that line the major streets flicker to life, casting pools of yellow light on the cobblestones below. Lamplighters make their rounds, carrying long poles with which they ignite each lamp in turn. Their steady progress through the streets marks the transition from day to night, a familiar ritual that signals the end of one day and the quiet beginning of night. Not all streets have gas lamps. In poorer neighborhoods, the nights are darker, lit only by whatever light spills from windows and doorways. Families rely on candles and oil lamps inside their homes, the soft flames providing just enough light for evening activities. The flickering light creates shadows that dance on walls and ceilings, constantly moving, alive with subtle motion. The sounds of the city change as night falls. The daytime cacophony of commerce and traffic fades, replaced by quieter sounds. A horse and carriage passing slowly, footsteps on cobblestones, voices in conversation muffled by distance and walls, a dog barking somewhere in the darkness, a baby crying, then comforted, then silent. The city breathes more slowly now, settling into the rhythm of rest. In their homes, families find ways to pass the evening hours. Those who can read might spend time with newspapers or books, holding the pages close to the lamplight. Others do handwork, mending clothes or knitting socks or making items to sell. Conversation continues, ranging from practical matters to dreams and memories. Parents tell children stories, passing down tales from the old country or inventing new adventures on the spot. Music often filled the evening hours. A father might play the fiddle, filling the small room with lively jigs or mournful ballads. A mother might sing as she worked, old songs remembered from childhood. Children learned these songs and carried them forward, keeping alive the musical traditions of their families and cultures. The music provided comfort and connection, a thread linking the present to the past. As the hour grows later, children are put to bed. Mothers tuck blankets around small bodies, smoothing hair and offering goodnight kisses. Prayers might be said, simple words asking for safety through the night and blessings for the day to come. Children drift off to sleep, their breathing becoming slow and regular, their faces peaceful in the dim light. Adults might stay up a while longer, enjoying a few quiet moments before sleep claims them as well. Husbands and wives sit together, talking softly about plans and worries and hopes. The fire in the stove burns low, the coals glowing red in the darkness. One by one, the lamps are extinguished until the home is lit only by the faint glow of the dying fire.
Outside, the streets grow quieter still. Most people are home now, behind closed doors, resting after the long day. A few night workers pass by, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The night watchmen make their rounds, checking that all is secure. Somewhere, a clock strikes the hour, its chimes ringing out over the sleeping city. The night sounds of the city are gentle and soothing. The distant whistle of a ship in the harbor, the soft rustle of wind through narrow streets, the occasional whinny of a horse in a nearby stable. These sounds blend together into a kind of lullaby, a natural music that accompanies the city's rest. As we near the end of our journey through the 19th century New York, let us pause to consider some of the deeper currents that shaped life in this remarkable place. The city was constantly changing during this era. Each decade brought new developments, new technologies, new challenges, and new opportunities. The population grew rapidly, fueled by immigration from Europe and migration from other parts of America. Buildings rose and fell, neighborhoods shifted and changed character, the boundaries of the city expanded ever outward. Technology was beginning to transform daily life in ways both large and small. The telegraph allowed messages to be sent instantly across great distances, revolutionizing communication. Railroads connected New York to cities throughout the country, making travel faster and easier than ever before. New manufacturing techniques made goods cheaper and more available. Slowly, steadily, the modern world was being born.
Yet many aspects of life remained rooted in traditions that stretched back centuries. The rhythms of agriculture still influenced the city as food arrived from surrounding farms and seasons affected what was available to eat. Religious observances marked the passage of time, with weekly services and annual holidays providing structure and meaning. Family and community remained the foundations of social life, just as they had been for generations. The city was a place of stark contrasts. Wealth and poverty existed side by side, often separated by just a few blocks. Magnificent mansions housed families of tremendous privilege, while overcrowded tenements sheltered those who had almost nothing. These inequalities were visible daily, impossible to ignore, yet somehow the city held together, its diverse population finding ways to coexist. Immigrants faced particular challenges as they adapted to their new home. They had to learn a new language, navigate unfamiliar customs, and find their place in a society that did not always welcome them. Prejudice against newcomers was common, and immigrants often faced discrimination in employment and housing. Yet they persevered, building communities, establishing businesses, and gradually becoming Americans, even as they maintained connections to their homelands. The city was also a place of remarkable creativity and energy. Artists, writers, musicians, and thinkers of all kinds found inspiration in its streets. New ideas spread quickly through the dense population, and innovations of all kinds emerged from the creative ferment. The city was a laboratory of American culture, a place where new ways of living and thinking were constantly being invented. And now, dear listener, our journey through the 19th century New York comes gently to its close. We have walked together through the busy streets of this remarkable city. We have visited the humble homes where families lived and loved. We have seen the markets where vendors called out their wares, the shops where goods of every kind were sold, the churches where communities gathered in faith. We have witnessed the hard work that filled most hours of most days, the determination and resourcefulness that kept families fed and housed.
We have shared in the simple pleasures of evening meals and quiet conversations, of music played by firelight and stories told to sleepy children. We have watched the city settle into night, its sounds growing soft and peaceful. These people who lived so long ago were not so different from us. They loved their families, worried about their futures, hoped for better days to come. They found joy in small things, a beautiful sunset, a child's laughter, a moment of connection with a friend. They faced their challenges with courage and carried on through difficult times. Their lives were ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in their resilience and humanity. The city they knew has long since changed. The buildings they lived in have been torn down and replaced. The streets they walked have been paved over and transformed. The sounds they heard, the smells they knew, the sights that filled their days, all have faded into history. Yet something of their spirit remains. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the memories we preserve, in the connections we feel to those who came before us. As you lie there in the quiet darkness, let yourself drift on these gentle thoughts. Imagine the soft glow of gas lamps on cobblestone streets. Hear the distant clip-clop of horses, the murmur of voices speaking in a dozen languages, the quiet breathing of a city at rest. Feel the peace that comes at the end of a day well lived, when work is done and loved ones are near. The night is deep now, and sleep is calling. Let it come. Let your thoughts grow soft and hazy like the edges of an old photograph. Let the images of 19th century New York fade gently into dreams. The city sleeps, and so may you. There is nothing more you need to do, nothing more you need to think about. Just rest now, peacefully, safely, as countless people have rested in this city through countless nights across the long years of history. Good night, dear listener. May your sleep be deep and restful. May your dreams be gentle and kind. And may you wake tomorrow refreshed and ready for whatever the new day brings. The story ends here, but history goes on forever, a river of time that carries us all gently forward. Float now on that river. Let it carry you into peaceful sleep, and know that you are part of something vast and beautiful and enduring. Rest well. Sleep peacefully. Good night.